Boom. So this is Why Do People Play MMOs Solo by Strife Hayes. Let's have a look at it.
Is an MMORPG? A question asked by scholars and philosophers alike. How do we define this genre? This question is actually so volatile and divisive in the MMO community, it really needs its own series of videos split over several specific topics. So let's do that. Let's dive into this fascinating genre and really ask, what is it? From the acronym MMORPG itself, to the games we know as MMORPGs, to the games we describe as MMOs which aren't quite. What are we actually talking about? Quick note, this video is kindly sponsored by Guild Wars 2, which is definitely an MMORPG, unlike Guild Wars 1, which is an online RPG. What's the difference? Let's find out. As always, thank you to the supporters on Patreon who allow me to keep making these videos. Several YouTubers far smarter than me have already made excellent videos examining what an MMORPG even is, from breaking down the acronym to analysing games that we would commonly describe as MMORPGs. And while we've made some advancement into working out what the hell this genre even is, there's only two things we really, as a community, agree on. One, Steam doesn't know what an MMO is, because the MMO tagged games are always quite strange. And two, an MMO is a game in which there is a fishing minigame. That's about as far as we've got. As for why fishing specifically, Adam Millard has a brilliant video on why so many games turn to that exact thing. If you're interested in game design, go and give it a watch, I'll link it in the description. But beyond fishing, what is an MMORPG? Well, the acronym stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. So I wanted to break this down and examine each bit individually. How massive? Multiplayer in what context? Is it always online? And what level of freedom is given within the RPG aspect? Some games we would know as MMORPGs aren't necessarily massive. Some of them don't even require multiplayer. Some of them aren't even always on.
I would argue most of them don't even require multiplayer nowadays. You can pretty much play the bulk of the experience solo. And from judging from my comment section, a lot of people are actually happy about this. I feel like we do need to strike a balance where we need to incentivize more group play. That's the way that I look at it personally.
Line. But while I was writing a brief outline of all the important points I wanted to cover in this rather long topic, I saw this tweet by Mrs. Sticks, retweeted by MMOBite. The original tweet reads, "Why do we like MMOs so much if we keep playing it like a single player?" And MMOBite replies, "It's such an unusual direction to take the genre, making it solo-friendly, less massively multiplayer. I think soon we're going to see MMORPGs simply become online role-playing games." The interesting aspect of that reply is he left out the MM, massively multiplayer. So if encouraging solo play of a multiplayer game is enough to justify changing the acronym, then the multiplayer element must be a core design pillar of this genre. This seemed like a good place to start exploring. I'm not saying MMOBite is right or wrong in his reply, it's just a solid starting point. Because is it a different direction? Or has this aspect actually always been there? Before we look at whether older MMORPGs even allowed solo play, never mind encouraged it, we have to ask a simple question of why would someone want to play solo? MMORPG, massively multiplayer, a genre which prides itself on...
I think that the biggest argument for people playing solo is actually very simple, and I'm sorry, I forgot to pause this. I think the biggest argument for people playing solo is convenience. The convenience of being able to pick up the game whenever you want to, not being bound to any schedule, because whenever it comes to properly organizing activities, you end up being bound to a schedule. So to give you guys an idea, as you all know, I've been super excited about Criterion Dungeons and all of this. Since they released, I've played them twice in the same day, and then I haven't really touched them because the people that I played them with haven't really been available. So I don't plan on going in there with a group of randoms. But see, that is something that is fundamentally determining whether or not I'm able to go do this content. Now, you can go in with randoms, but that's just not the same. It's not as good of an experience, not by any stretch. So therefore, I end up just kind of like, okay, I'll wait it out, and you just focus on doing things that you can do solo. So, you know.
giving you the ability to play with millions of other people, players from all around the globe. Why would anyone choose to take on a multiplayer adventure on their own? Well, the answer's pretty simple. It's because you want to. The gameplay of an MMO is usually a fantastical adventure, broken down by slow, monotonous grinding between the exciting bits.
Also, I gotta say, am I the only person that has a reasonably sized UI? I mean, look at this. Jesus Christ, it's massive. It's a throbbingly big UI. Like, Jesus, Josh. It's throbbingly massive. Like, let me show you. Let me show you what my UI looks like. If I can find a video here. Is it this one? Yeah, see? Look. Nice, tidy. Let me just... Yeah, see? Look, here's all my abilities. Here's the chat. Here's the thing. And my aura is actually down here. Next to my abilities. Boom. You're probably one of the few people who plays in 4K. I mean, game looks great in 4K.
Leveling skills or killing the same enemy again and again. And while it can be nice to have company during these long stretches of repetition, it's not always wanted. People enjoy doing lots of things by themselves. I like real-time strategy games, but I also like playing against the computer. I like Unreal Tournament against bots. I like painting Warhammer by myself. All things which are considered boring and repetitive by some, and which could likely be improved by sharing the experience with someone else. But here's the thing. I do share those experiences with other people when I want to. If I want to play multiplayer games with other people, I will.
Oh God!
Or if I want
guys, I looked over here. Bruin, I can't watch this video anymore. It's, oh my God, dude. Oh no. Oh no. So, for those of you that don't understand what that is, each of these white dots here, you guys can't see it properly because of chat. Let me just disable this for a second here. All of these white dots that you see here, each of these is a slot in Josh's inventory, right? All of those are slots in his inventory. So, for instance, the top one's the weapon. The one immediately after that's the helm. The one after that's going to be the chest piece, gloves, legs, boots. And then on this side, because he's a paladin, it's going to be a shield. And then it's going to be, I think, earrings, necklace, bracelet, and 2 rings. That is what each of these things represent. Normally, these would be green. But because they're white, it means that every single item that Josh has equipped is fully soulbound. And what does that mean? That means when an item is fully soulbound, and not soulbound, spiritbound. When an item is fully spiritbound, you can right-click it and extract materia for free. It doesn't go any higher than fully soulbound, spiritbound, which is 100%. So basically, whenever you get a white dot over there, you're supposed to go and check your gear and get the materia. So Josh is sitting on a pile of materia that he can get right now for free. And it's like, listen, I a couple of months ago, I didn't even know that that's what this meant. So it's not like I'm one to talk, all right? But it's just like, after learning how it works, every time I look at somebody and I see it like this, I'm like, no, get the materia. Oh, it does not destroy the item? No, it's just free materia. They just give you free materia whenever you fully spirit bind the item. And then whenever you extract the materia, it puts the spirit bind all the way down to 1% again. And then you level it up again and you get more free materia. So you can basically keep extracting materia for free.
Paint models with other people, I will. The important thing is, I have the choice. When someone says they enjoy playing MMO games solo, it doesn't necessarily mean they avoid all human contact at all costs. It usually means they prefer to enjoy the game either alone or with a closer, more specific group of friends, because those friends enjoy the game in the same way they do, either focusing on the lore, the mechanics, or min-maxing. It's important to not simply have a large player base for the sake of having a large player base if you don't actually interact with them. A fun playgroup who enhance the game for you is worth far more. Playing an MMO can often be a relaxing hobby, while constant interaction with people can be a draining hobby in both the real world and the virtual. Sometimes you just want to come home from a day surrounded by people and go and exist in a fantastical virtual world by yourself. Yes, there are other people also in this world, but that's actually a calming element of it, because you don't need to spend energy interacting with them, it's just nice to have them there. Other players are acting as free-thinking, feeling background characters, framing your own adventure, lending the world weight and reality. Knowing that your actions affect a living world without the emotional effort of constantly needing to be social in that world is enjoyable. Playing an MMO with a group means you will have certain expectations, requirements of you. You'll have to keep up with any chat that's going on or play your class. You have a role to fulfill and you can't let your team down, and that's pressure. Sometimes you want to experience the gameplay of an MMORPG, the world, the music, the characters, the lore, the story, or the mechanics without that pressure of feeling like you need to fulfill a role in a team. You can have the game on in the background while you watch a film, watch Netflix, read a book, or even do some work, or most likely what you're doing right now, which is watching some YouTube videos. It can be nice to experience the MMORPG without the pressure that being in a team puts on you.
You've definitely seen me plenty of times playing video games while I'm doing these reactions, so he's 1,000% correct. Yes, very much true.
Whatever your favorite MMO is, it can always be played in the background. And if you aren't playing an MMO...
Can you unblock Captain Borkani was promoting one of my videos? God damn it. Oh, man. But yeah, I do have a guide video. If anybody ends up watching this, I have like a starter guide video for Final Fantasy XIV. Thank you.
Right now, consider downloading this video's sponsor, Guild Wars 2. This is the second video of mine that Guild Wars 2 have sponsored quite recently, which makes me think the management team have finally found the marketing team hiding in a long-forgotten office somewhere or just playing jumping puzzles all day and are demanding they actually start doing their job and sponsoring some YouTubers or something. I've played Guild Wars 2 since it launched all the way back in 2012, and it's been one of the few MMOs I've installed on every PC I've had since then, and finally, after like 5 years of coming soon, it's actually released on Steam. They've even released 2 very positive reviews. The latest expansion, End of Dragons, brings a ton of new content without invalidating the previous expansions, Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire, but you don't need to buy anything to try the game. There is a massive free trial. The base game is free with no time limit, and if you do like it, it is a one-time purchase with no monthly sub. Once you own Guild Wars 2, you own it. And
I own all of the expansions for Guild Wars 2, by the way. And I still only ever played the base game. I did enjoy what I've played of it, but I got tired after a while because what I wanted to do is do more dungeons, and the dungeon scene in Guild Wars 2 is a little bit different from other games. I feel like it's kind of hard to, at least I had difficulties like joining dungeons.
Given the amount of hours I've got out of this game, Guild Wars 2 is probably the best value money I've ever spent on a video game. To celebrate the Steam launch, there's a link in the description. You can sign up, get a code, and grab the game on Steam, and then if you want, you can redeem the code for an experience boost pack, some karma boosting, and a 10-slot bag with a mini pet. This all saves you about $10, and it's free, so there's no reason not to. There's a new player guide on the website, although the in-game tutorial is actually really good. There's great build variety in the classes, and the mount system is so good, it is now the standard by which other games are to be judged. Now,
and yes, they have the best mount system of any MMORPG by far. It's not even close.
Regular viewers will know that I don't accept sponsorships unless I can personally vouch for the product, and honestly, Guild Wars 2 is just a really good MMORPG game with a great deal of content that every player should at least try. Right, back to talking about solo MMO gameplay. When I play MMORPGs on stream, I often have people following me around, but
I miss this game so much. And I know you can play it right now, but it's like, it's not the same that it was back then, right? Because I played a ton of the original Guild Wars. I never got the final expansion, which I believe was Eye of the North or whatever it was. At that point, I think at that point I started playing World of Warcraft, and I moved over from Guild Wars to World of Warcraft. But I miss the original Guild Wars. The original Guild Wars is fucking amazing, dude. The original Guild Wars, just like the way it worked. So like, for instance, you see these abilities that you have here at the bottom. So there would be bosses spread throughout the world. You wouldn't know where these bosses would be, but there would be bosses, and you would have to go kill them. And then you would also need one of these signets. I think that this one's the resurrection signet, but there's another signet that you could get, which was like a signet that you would equip, and then you would be able to capture the class's ability from that boss for yourself. And that was so satisfying. I don't know, there was just something special about the way that you went around through the world, collecting skills and whatnot, organizing your build. Looks like Josh here's playing a cookie cutter minion mancer because he's got necromancer plus mesmer skills. If I remember correctly, the way that this build worked was you would use the necro stuff to spawn an army, and then you would use the mesmer stuff to keep you fed with mana. Again, I don't remember if that's exactly how it worked, but I think that was the basis of the minion mancer build, and it is a ton of fun. Like you can raise a literal fucking army by doing this. It is so good, dude. It is so good. Yeah, you eventually could teach some skills to NPCs and whatnot, and you'd be running around with a full party. It was very, very satisfying. But some things had to be done with players, even though I think that they changed some of that, because then you'd be able to hire your own classes that you had played. You'd be able to get them as mercenaries or something. That's something that they did further to the end when I stopped playing. But like, it was really good, the amount of stuff. And here's the thing, they also had a really cool PvP scene. I used to do a lot of PvP. They had this thing called the Hall of Heroes, where you do these kind of like things where you'd fight against other groups on a progressive match to see if you'd make it to the top. I've made it to the top a couple of times. It was really, really cool. I've really, really enjoyed it. Guild Wars 1 was very, very good.
I would still consider myself a mostly solo player, despite the fact I enjoy dungeons and team-based events. So how does that work? Well, the simple fact that I'm playing with people doesn't mean that I'm interacting with them or connecting to them in any meaningful way, and I think it's this lack of meaningful connection to other people that people often confuse with the lack of
Yeah, like see these right here, these are NPCs. Like see fighter henchmen, brawler henchman, enchanter henchman. Enchanter is mesmer, if I'm not mistaken. Healer henchman, that would be a monk, because the monks are the healers in here. And that looks like a ranger. I actually used to play a ranger. I used to play ranger necro, but in PvP I played monk.
Player elements. There is a long-held belief that newer MMORPGs are pushing people more towards solo-focused play. You exist in a world with other people, but you don't necessarily interact with them. I've even made a video called Social to Solo, where I look at how the design philosophy has changed over the years, allowing people to experience the game solo.
Is this Runes of Magic?
But were older games actually more cooperative? Did they demand more teamwork, or do people simply remember them as more cooperative because hanging out with people online was novel for the time, so people did that aspect more? The massively multiplayer part is a major point.
I'll tell you that part right now. Old school Guild Wars, I don't know how it is right now. Old school Guild Wars definitely required people. Even though you could bring these henchmen would not be able to tackle a lot of situations in game. So you would have to bring at least a couple of other players with you. Otherwise, you'd not be able to tackle some of the more challenging encounters in the game.
Of contention within the MMORPG community. What is massive? It's not quantified, it's far too vague. From games designers to players, we don't know what you want massive to count as. 1,000 players? 10,000? 100,000? 1 million? Or 10 million? If you count 1 million players as massive, can I have 1 million people on my friends list? Could I have an ignore list 1 million players long? Will there ever be a zone where you could actually have 1 million players all at one time? Could you even interact with 1 million if you wanted to? If you have a number higher than the amount of players a single player could realistically be expected to engage with at any one time, is that enhancing your player base, or is that simply padding it out? How big is massive, and how big does massive need to be for the players to actually notice? Old school RuneScape has hundreds of thousands of active players, so it could rightfully be called a massively successful game, and it's definitely multiplayer, but each individual world holds up to 2,000 people, meaning even if you had every single player on a given world in the same space, you'd only be interacting with a tiny fraction of the total player base at any one time. and you wouldn't likely be able to form any meaningful connection with any one of them in the mass of players. The Elder Scrolls Online has its mega servers, shards, all existing simultaneously, but instead of showing you every player around you, it has phasing, where you'll always see enough players for the world to feel full, but never so many you feel overwhelmed, which makes it easier to form connections. But is this still massive if you're experiencing a curated version of the player base? Is the word massive more about the reality of who you interact with in the game, or the greater community around the game? If the majority of your game is dungeons and raids with say 5, 10 or 25 people in a raid, are you actually interacting with 25 people? Or are you interacting with thousands of people in groups of 25 at a time? Or are you interacting at all? Does a dungeon run with no connection to another player even count as interaction? You're as close to a random player in a random group as you are to a stranger you walk alongside while walking through town, or someone...
Yeah. He's not wrong. Like, basically when you jump into a dungeon through a dungeon finder, there's very little connection with the players there. Then again, if you jump into like a raid through party finder, there's also probably going to be not much connection with the players there. So it's not, you have to seek out the people that you want to interact with. And usually those relationships are born of convenience.
Someone sat 2 seats behind you on a roller coaster. Just because you're going on the same journey doesn't mean you're taking the journey together. MMOs are often broken down into the styles of theme park versus sandbox. Would going to a theme park alone count as interacting with everyone at the park? Could you say you've had a multiplayer experience? And should anyone be stopped having that experience if they are alone? Most often it's less about the potential of who you could interact with and more about who you actually do interact with. A small group of 5 to 10 friends talking and adventuring together will feel a lot more social and connected than 500 players silently running the same dungeon again and again. Quality really does beat quantity when it comes to meaningful human interactions. Psychologists have even studied how many people we can actually feel connected to. It's known as Dunbar's number, and it's around 150 people.
For a second, I was thinking about Xenoblade Chronicles, and I was like, Dunbar? No, but in Xenoblade Chronicles, it's Dunban. I was like, what?
More, and you simply cannot connect to them on an individual personal level, meaning even if your game does have 1 billion players, only 150 of them may be close enough to you to be meaningful to play with. The massively part of the acronym can sometimes be a bit of a false selling point. Having 1 million players means nothing unless you're required to interact with all 1 million, and if you are, that's overwhelming. Having enough players to make your game feel fleshed out and full, but not too many to overwhelm, while still maintaining those personal relationships, is a good amount to aim for. This
is perfect. I'm really elaborate my previous idea. New content for previous expansions. Final Fantasy XIV, what I was trying to say is getting new content for lower levels to encourage new and max level players to go back in zones you mentioned or barely visited, like Fate side quests and rewards. Final Fantasy XIV already does this to an extent, but yes, this is very important. But it still feels like just a band-aid fix to get players together. This idea of yours. So I don't know. You need something a little bit more meaningful to get players together. I don't know what the solution is though. I don't.
Potential for connections is massive. But until the player chooses to realize those potentials and actually interact with and connect to people, it remains potential, not realized. Many modern MMO games are designed so you don't need to interact with people, but you can if you choose to. The potential is there, but it's not required. It's this change in design, this facilitation of solo play in a genre which prides itself on multiplayer aspects that many people point to as the downfall of the genre. They say MMORPGs used to be games which needed player interaction and so forced those connections between players, resulting in long-term friendships, guilds or clans. And now taking that away, the genre is weaker for it. And this is of course subjective, but I decided maybe I should go back and play an older MMORPG and see how that handles the facilitation of solo play to gather some information on this strange phenomenon.
The biggest problem with that is that was back in the day. Back in the day, I feel like people weren't nearly as busy and nearly as saturated with content as we are now. Nowadays, we're basically saturated with content at all times. We're always saturated with content, whether that's TikTok, YouTube, Twitch streams. I mean, you're watching this stream right now. Or if you happen to be watching on YouTube, you're watching this on YouTube right now. We're constantly saturated with content. Our minds are always thinking about different things. And we also have a lot, as people grow older, the people who've enjoyed those games back then, they also have a lot more going on in their lives. In my case, I have 2 children, for instance, right? And that basically makes it so that it's a lot harder to commit to playing a video game for longer periods of time, and people end up not wanting to commit. And then on top of it, they have other options. So for instance, you look at an MMORPG like, say, Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft or something like that, and you want to go do a raid, or you want to go do like a Criterion dungeon or whatever, Mythic Plus, something like that. That means that you're devoting a significant amount of time to doing this. If you're someone who respects other players' time, you're going to be devoting a significant amount of time to it. If you're an asshole, you're going to leave halfway through and you're going to be like, this is taking too long. Bye, fuck y'all. But if you're a respectable individual, if you're an iron breaker, you're committing 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what activity you happen to be doing. However, you have other options, like, say, for instance, if you are someone who also enjoys Fortnite, you can literally go in, do a match, and, if you're not even enjoying the match, you're like, yeah, I'm out, fuck this, bye. Or if you're playing a shooter, you can also go in and get a match in a lot easier than doing something of organized fashion in an MMORPG. And that is why, it's a lot harder to find people that want to commit to doing these things. There's just too many options and too much content saturation. And people are like, well, I don't want to invest my time in this thing because this one takes too long.
Now, I've played a lot of MMORPGs, some for thousands of hours, some for only a few, but most of them have allowed me to have a pretty decent solo experience, teaming up with people when I wanted to, playing alone when I wanted to, and I value this. MMORPGs often advertise themselves by saying you can have your own adventure, especially the sandbox games, live your own way, forge your own path, and if I want that path to be alone who occasionally teams up, that should be something I can choose to do. If you look at many of the modern MMO offerings, you'll see solo play is not only viable, but often encouraged. Old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3 both have their Iron Man mode, literally cutting off a layer of interaction with other players by removing trading, forcing you to survive this harsh world on your own. And most of the endgame bosses can be soloed. Indeed, when I spoke to Mod Kieran and Elena about the latest raid coming out, I asked specifically if they designed this to be solo possible, and they had. The Elder Scrolls Online has a solo-focused story with fully voice-acted cutscenes and lots of solo instances as you travel to save Tamriel, and the world bosses are possible solo but incredibly tough. Guild Wars 2 is the same, a deep involving story with a vast majority of the game being solo-friendly. And when the grouping does happen, if it happens impromptu, it gets organised behind the scenes, so just by being near someone, you're automatically working toward the same goal as them, meaning you can now work together alone. Star Wars The Old Republic is one of the better single-player Star Wars games and Star Wars stories, which just happens to be online. It takes place in an online world with other players. Even the flashpoints, team-based dungeons, will supply you with AI-controlled NPCs to complete them.
That wasn't like that when I played. AI-controlled NPCs to complete flashpoints? Sounds fun.
If you don't have a team. Now, I'm not saying these games don't have multiplayer content. Old school RuneScape has Barbarian Assault, a minigame which needs a team. The Elder Scrolls Online has its dungeons. Guild Wars 2 has the PvP battlegrounds and the fractals. These games all have content which cannot be completed solo, but this isn't usually early game or story focused. These multiplayer experiences are usually extra, in addition to the main game. Indeed, Star Wars supplying AI NPCs to accompany solo players through dungeons by fleshing out the team is a mechanic I've been a big fan of for a long time. Allowing solo players to experience what your game has poured endless hours of design into is a good idea. It's the same reason I really like the henchman system in Guild Wars 1 a lot, but we'll get onto this later. So we can see that modern MMOs are mostly accessible to solo players, with the choice to connect to others if you want to. But let's go back and see how older MMOs handle this. I decided to go back and try and play EverQuest 1 on Steam, the live version, not the Project 99 original. I even streamed the whole thing on YouTube. The VOD is available to go back and watch if you want to. And I'll likely stream more because I actually really enjoyed EverQuest 1. It's janky in places and it's far too convoluted in others. It relies a lot on keyboard shortcuts and typing your interactions, and target enemy is bound to F8 and not tab, and it's hard to click through things, which threw me a little, but all in all, it's a very well-made game. Now, EverQuest released back in 1999, and it's not only still going, but it's still being actively updated. It's had 28 expansions, with the 29th planned for release in 2023. That is an insanely successful lifespan for an MMORPG. It is testament to the quality of the game that it still has an active player base. Now, EverQuest is often given as an example of an old-school, hardcore MMORPG. It's harsh, it's unforgiving. You need to rely on your team to survive, and that is indeed true. EverQuest is a hard game, both in gameplay and in the meta elements of the gameplay. Understanding the UI and navigating all the keyboard shortcuts will take you some time to learn. The thing with EverQuest is there's a lot of downtime between the gameplay moments. As a mage, you need to sit down to recover your mana, and this means as a fighter, you'll be waiting for the mage. There's a lot of moments where nothing is happening, and so you will talk to the players in your group. When EverQuest was big in 1999 and 2000, you didn't have Netflix. You didn't have a second monitor to watch YouTube on. You would focus entirely on the game, and therefore you would find the fun within the game, which, for the majority of...
You know what? I didn't even think about the second monitor thing. He is so right. Like, when I was playing back in the day World of Warcraft, I didn't have a second monitor. It was all main monitor. As a matter of fact, when the second monitor was an option, that was when I quit playing World of Warcraft. Oh my God. The revelations. Oh no. It's true. Like, listen, let me tell you when I quit World of Warcraft for the very first time, okay? Let me tell you the exact moment that I decided I was going to quit. I was playing World of Warcraft. I was raiding. I had figured out everything that I needed to do as a tank for the boss. I knew exactly what I needed to do. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I knew exactly every step of the strategy that I needed to implement. But the rest of the people playing with me hadn't. So that meant every mechanic, we were wiping, and I was super bored. So I literally just started watching Indiana Jones. It was The Great Crusade. Is that right? No, it was the what is it? Raiders of the Lost Ark? I think it was Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I was watching Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, while I was doing this raid, and I realized that I was being more entertained by Raiders of the Lost Ark than raiding. And when I made this connection in my head, I was like, I need to stop playing this game. And that's when I stopped playing it. Yeah, that's basically when I stopped playing World of Warcraft. You guys want to know what I did after I stopped, after I quit playing World of Warcraft? Because this is interesting. If I had never quit at that point, I would probably have never gone on to play Dark Souls. I might not even be a content creator right now. I would have never gone on to play all the things that I did, because like immediately after I quit, I picked up a Wii U and I started playing Legend of Zelda, the Twilight Princess. And I was like, oh, these single player games also have cool boss fights. Because in my head, I was thinking like, no, only MMORPGs have cool boss fights. All of these other games fucking suck. None of them have cool boss fights. And then I played Twilight Princess and I was like, oh, this actually has a cool boss fight. And I'm not dependent on 24 other people to know what to do. If I know what to do and I can figure it out, I can do it by myself. And then eventually I also got like a PlayStation 3, started playing Demon Souls and a bunch of other games and, you know, all of that. But yeah, that's when I quit playing World of Warcraft. So the second monitor thing is actually very interesting. It's a very good analogy that I hadn't even thought of.
Game was talking to other people. So when I played EverQuest, I decided to read all the classes. And what really stood out to me was the description of the Necromancer class. In character creation, the class is described as: Necromancers are a very self-sufficient class and often choose to adventure alone, though they can provide great value to a group as well. The Necromancer is an excellent choice for the independent player who enjoys a wide variety of abilities. On the EverQuest wiki, the class is described as one of the best soloing classes throughout the game. Now, EverQuest has seen many changes throughout the years. I assumed maybe this was a modern update, but there's a version of the game known as Project 99 which emulates the original experience without any of the quality of life upgrades. And the Project 99 wiki entry for the Necromancer describes it as such, the Necromancer is very independent. Few support classes are able to offer anything that the Necromancer does not already have, and items and gear do not carry the same importance as they do for other classes. The Wiki Class Highlights section even says, Necromancers are one of the most independent of all classes, being designed with a number of self-only spells that certain other casters can cast on others. Example, self-only invisibility and self-only evacuation, making it a prime choice for those that plan to solo the majority of their careers. However, because of the wide variety of abilities, many not gained until higher levels, a Necromancer must constantly learn new ways to play their class. So even back in 1999, before the popular argument that MMORPGs were becoming too solo-friendly, in the game that many consider one of the grandfathers of the genre, there was a class specifically designed to allow people to adventure alone. When I played Meridian 59, considered the first 3D MMORPG, the opening crypt tutorial section has a door which requires 2 people to open. You must pull 2 levers at the same time. And while it is technically possible to do solo with almost frame-perfect inputs, it's not a required room. It simply leads to an optional boss and some low-level loot. In fact, nothing about Meridian 59 demands you team up to play. How about Guild Wars 1, considered by many to not be an MMORPG, but instead, including by themselves, an online role-playing game? How does this differ? Well, in Guild Wars 1, the world is broken down into maps, both safe or dangerous, and the only times you will see other players in Guild Wars 1 is when you're all in a hub city or a safe outpost. When you travel outside of the city, you'll only ever see yourself or any other players you specifically teamed up with while you were in that safe area. So if you leave town without talking to another player, is the game going to force you to adventure solo? Well, no. There's an NPC henchman system. By the exits of any safe map, you'll find a row of henchmen you can invite to your team, and they'll fight by your side throughout the map, acting as regular players. In fact, once you're a higher level, you can actually turn your own characters into mercenaries, meaning they will now be available as NPC supports when you play on other characters. So you're supported by your own old characters. And it's this lack of open-world player interaction which leads people to describe Guild Wars 1 as an online RPG, not necessarily a massively multiplayer online RPG. Even Final Fantasy XIV is considered an RPG first with an MMO second, meaning it's focused more on the personal journey of the player through its story with multiplayer elements added on, such as the dungeons and the raids, and then the daily roulette allowing you to find a team quickly to receive your reward for playing. But just look at the memes. People say the end game of almost any MMO, including Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2, is fashion. Just chatting in Limsa Lominsa, or trying to turn yourself into a light bulb. Extremely social things to do. Socializing is alive and well in many MMOs because the choice is there, while it's also not being forced onto the solo connection player if they don't want to. This means the MM part of the acronym, massively multiplayer, seems to relate to both the player base size and the potential to interact with them in the game world at random, not the social need or demand to party up to experience the majority of the game. Yes, you can form connections with people in online games. You've always been able to. That aspect hasn't gone anywhere. You can still do that. You just don't need to do it as frequently. People often...
And I think not only you don't need to do it as frequently, a lot of people just don't do it at all.
Say to me, yes, I know you can still do that, but older games encouraged it, so people did it more. And that might be true, but if people are doing something because they're pushed to do it without a choice, that doesn't necessarily mean they would do it if given the choice. In modern day MMOs, we see that choice exist more. And more players are choosing to play with smaller, closer-knit groups of friends, or refer to themselves as solo players. A playstyle which has always been on some level supported, but is now much, much more popular. So have MMORPGs become less social? Not really. All of the elements to be social are still there, there's just other stuff to do as well. Unlike the downtime in EverQuest when you would sit down to restore your mana and therefore you had nothing else to do but talk to someone, you now have hundreds of other things to do, both in and out of the game. Why play an MMORPG solo? because you want to. At that exact moment, you maybe don't want to interact with people. You maybe don't want to be relied upon to play your role within a team. It doesn't mean that you won't interact with people in the future, or wait till your mates log on and join up with them. It doesn't mean that you won't talk to someone as they cut a tree down or mine a rock next to you. It just means that you have lots of other choices other than being social to distract you. It just means you want to exist within this multiplayer world as a single player for a short time. And there's nothing to stop you from doing that, and if you play an MMO solo, you're not playing it wrong. You're just enjoying your adventure your way. As for that tweet, I think MMORPGs have always, to some players, been solo-focused online role-playing games that exist within a living world. The massively multiplayer bit was, to several players, more of the potential for social connection and not a demand to do so. And just like the potential was years ago, it's still there, it's just not as novel as it used to be. So people aren't specifically selling the games on the fact you can do that. The social players exist within guilds and clans, discords and forums. Still connected, just not chatty within the game itself. Modern MMOs do indeed have more systems that facilitate easier solo play than ever before. But this isn't driving the games to become solo only, it's simply increasing the amount of choice in how you play. There's nothing stopping you teaming up, just like the old days, with a huge group of players and adventuring around together. But unlike the old days, there's now much more choice to not do that, and people are choosing that much more frequently. But how do you play? Are you a solo-only player? Are you social with everyone? Or do you prefer mostly solo play until your mates log on, where you'll team up with them? Let me know in the comments below. Another massive thank you to Guild Wars 2 for sponsoring this video. Use the link in the description to get the game and some cool free stuff. And as always, have a great day.
So, obviously, go check out the video. Be sure to leave it a like. Be sure to give it some watch time. Don't just like and leave, because that is bad for the algorithm. Wait, what the hell? Bro, YouTube unsubscribe. I can't. Like, dude, YouTube is unsubscribing me from people. I've been subbed to Josh since God knows when. I've been watching his videos since God knows when. YouTube's just like, hey, I just don't feel like you should be subscribed anymore. It's not an excuse. I don't need to make up excuses. If I wasn't subscribed, I'd say so. It definitely happens. And happens on Twitch too. Like, people lose follows. Anyways, to the topic of the video, it's like, again, to me, it's all about the balance. To me, it's all about the balance. And I do feel like certain things, sometimes if you make it too easy for players to just play solo, then you're going to see very little player interaction, and eventually most players are just playing a single player game in an MMO, which is not necessarily the best way. I feel like they're it's just a weird thing, because at the same time you also don't want to exclude people, because MMORPGs are already hard enough to get into because they require a significant time investment for people to get involved and engaged with an MMORPG, right? So while I do feel like there needs to be more reasons to group with players, at the same time I do feel like what Final Fantasy XIV is doing, for instance, where at this point you can do every main dungeon in Realm Reborn and I believe in Heavensward using trusts. The only expansion that's missing is Stormblood. I don't know if you can do trusts in Stormblood already or not. So I think that is good, because that is like old content that maybe not as many people are running. But at the same time, a lot of players end up just doing that, and they end up not really playing with the players, which makes it hard to find people to group up with, you know? So I don't know. Treading, I feel like the least you can interact with other people, the better. I'd say the main stories tend to help social interaction options. You have to walk around so much, especially in hub areas. It's like, again, I just... It's definitely a strange conundrum to have. I feel like it's all about balance. It's all about balance. You don't want to go too far in one direction, and you don't want to go too far in another, because sometimes I do just feel like, oh, let me just log in and do some random shit. And other times I'm like, hey, let me just log in and do some group content. So it's just important to maintain both of them. is what I'm saying. And I wish that people would give sometimes groups more of a shot instead of just being loners most of the time. Because a lot of times people don't give group play as much of a shot because they don't have to anymore. It's optional. So, yeah. Hey, Ruri, gotta say, I really enjoyed your video about the Criterion Dungeons, talking about your opinions about it, expectations, understanding how in the long run it doesn't match the devs' philosophy within the game. Hope the devs see your video and take the info to they can improve things in later dungeons. Yeah, it's like, I'm not trying to impose my own view on that, but anyway. That's it for this video.